Number 3. Linda Riccio. Linda Riccio and Ronald Ruse, who were both in their early 20s, met in early 1980 in Escondido, California. They were both employed at a car dealership. Riccio worked at the front desk and Ruse was a mechanic. They started dating, and by September, they were living together. They moved in quickly because Riccio said that her mother had kicked her out. In 1983, they moved into an apartment in Carlsbad, California. In the 6 years that they were together, Riccio had gotten pregnant twice, but she terminated both pregnancies. By April 1986, after 6 years together, the relationship had soured. Ruse had become tired of Riccio's obsessive behavior. Unbeknownst to Riccio, he had rented an apartment and made arrangements to move out. Riccio stayed in the apartment they once shared, and Ruse paid the rent and the utilities. For the next year, Riccio and Ruse dated on and off. In June 1986, Ruse told Riccio that he wanted to buy her something nice for her birthday to show his appreciation for their years together. She asked for a ring. So Ruse purchased a cubic zirconium ring. Riccio then told her friends it was an engagement ring. Ronald Ruse's 10th year high school reunion was in August 1987. He planned on attending, but he wasn't going to bring Riccio. When she found this out, she called the reunion committee and told them that Ruse would not be attending. Ruse told his friends he was trying to be friends with Riccio while moving on with his love life. But Riccio was refusing to let go of the relationship. She called him constantly and would show up at his apartment unannounced. She then would refuse to leave. In September 1987, over a year after Ronald Ruse moved out of the apartment he shared with Linda Riccio, he started dating Vicki Woodruff. Ruse then told Riccio to stop contacting him. After breaking off contact, Riccio reached out to Ruse's sister. Riccio asked her to encourage Ruse to talk to her. Ruse's sister refused to help her and told Riccio it would be best if she moved on. Riccio said she loved Ruse, but she knew the relationship was over. Riccio told Ruse's sister that she felt like killing him. Over the next several weeks, Riccio called other members of Ruse's family and told them she was pregnant and needed to talk to Ruse. However, she was not pregnant. In October 1987, Riccio started harassing Ruse's new girlfriend, Vicki Woodruff. On October 12th, Woodruff's car was parked at Ruse's spot at his apartment. Riccio scratched her car. Riccio managed to get Woodruff's phone number and address from the Department of Motor Vehicles. Woodruff lived with her mother. Riccio then started making harassing phone calls to Ruse, Woodruff, and Woodruff's mother. At the end of October 1987, Ruse applied for a temporary restraining order. The day after Ruse applied for the restraining order, Riccio, who had not yet been served the restraining order, went into Ruse's workplace and tried to talk to him. It was the third time she had come to his workplace in 5 days. He tossed a shop rag at her and it hit her in the torso. Riccio filed battery charges against him. On November 3rd, Riccio was served with a restraining order. 5 days later, Riccio made 2 disturbing phone calls to people in Ruse's life. She called Ruse's good friend and told him she was going to kill Ruse and Woodruff and then herself. The second call was to Ruse's sister. Riccio told her she was, quote, going to do something to your brother that I'm going to regret, unquote. 3 days later, on November 11th, 1987, Ruse was playing softball. Riccio showed up and they got into a loud argument. That night, Woodruff spent the night at Ruse's apartment. The next morning at 5 a.m., someone rang the doorbell. Woodruff opened the door and found some items that belonged to Ruse. They had been destroyed. About 3 hours later, Ruse and Woodruff left for work. Riccio, who had been watching their apartment, yelled at them. Several days later, on November 17, 1987, Riccio paid for a .38 caliber revolver, but there was a 15-day waiting period, so she didn't take the gun with her. On November 21, 1987, Ruse and Woodruff moved into a new apartment. They didn't tell Riccio where they had moved to, but she had managed to get the address from the utilities department. On December 5, 1987, Riccio picked up the gun she had purchased. That same day, she went with the gun to Ruse and Woodruff's apartment. She taped a threatening note addressed to Woodruff on the apartment door. In the note, she wrote she was pregnant with twins and Ruse was the father. Riccio also wrote, quote, "I'm going to tear the two of you to the bone," unquote. After finding the note on the door, Ruse and Woodruff called the police. An officer found Riccio in her car in the couple's neighborhood. He told her to stay away from them. The next day, Woodruff and Ruse ended their relationship because of the stalking. The same day Riccio taped the letter to the door, she mailed a letter to Woodruff. Part of it reads, quote, "Seems you wound up in a place I warned you to back away from. There is no way in hell I was going to give you the opportunity to spend time with Ron. Hope your 3 months was worth this, bitch. No one is about to replace my 7 years. Unfortunately, this was the only solution. Ron made his bed, and I had to make sure he was going to lie in it. I told you I would get him in the end," unquote. On December 8, 1987, Riccio went to the gun range and practiced firing the gun. 2 days later, Riccio signed the rental agreement for the apartment next to Ruse's. 4 days after that, on December 14, 1987, Riccio called Ruse and told him she had rented the apartment. She said they needed to talk. Ruse agreed, and after work he went to her apartment. Around 5:30 p.m., neighbors heard 5 gunshots. Ruse, who had been shot twice, made it to a neighbor's apartment. 28-year-old Ronald Ruse died before the paramedics arrived. Riccio ran from the apartment and got into her car. She drove several miles to Oceanside, California, and then found a phone booth. She called 911 and told them she had shot her former boyfriend. 27-year-old Linda Riccio was arrested. She was called the Fatal Attraction Killer in the media. The film, Fatal Attraction, is about a woman who stalks a man after having a one-night stand with him. Fatal Attraction was released in theaters about 3 months before the murder. Linda Riccio went to trial in March 1989. The prosecution said that Riccio was angry that Ruse had broken up with her and moved on. She harassed him, his girlfriend, and his family for months and then killed him. Riccio's lawyer argued that the death was an accident or self-defense, but it was not murder. Riccio testified on her own behalf. She said she had never planned on killing Ruse. She had asked him to come to her apartment to talk over things. She said if that didn't work, she was going to shoot herself in front of him so he would have to live with the guilt of what he did to her for the rest of his life. She said in the year after he moved out, he had tortured her by leading her on. Riccio said that Ruse told her he was trying to find someone to kill her. Riccio said that Ruse lunged at her and it scared her. She said the gun went off and she didn't remember shooting Ruse. The prosecution argued that Riccio had always intended to shoot Ruse. She had recently purchased the gun and practiced firing the weapon. She then lured him to her apartment and killed him. The prosecution argued that Riccio was lying in wait for Ruse. Lying in wait is a special circumstance, and Riccio could have been sentenced to life without parole if the jury believed she had been lying in wait. The trial lasted 5 weeks. The jury deliberated over 3 days. 29-year-old Linda Riccio was found guilty of first-degree murder. However, the jury did not find that she had been lying in wait for him. They thought she probably did that but there was insufficient evidence to prove it. In June 1989, Riccio was sentenced to 27 years to life. Linda Riccio first applied for parole in 2004. She told the parole board that Ruse was abusive and hired someone to kill her, so she bought the gun as protection. Ruse lunged at her and she shot him. She was denied parole. 3 years later, she tweaked her story and said she bought the gun to shoot herself and instead shot Ruse when he charged at her. She claimed she had used methamphetamine before the shooting. She was denied parole once again. Every time between 2004 and 2016 that Riccio applied for parole, she was denied. Then, in October 2017, she was granted parole. However, in March 2018, Governor Gavin Newsom reversed the decision. There were 2 reasons given for the reversal. The first was the nature of the murder, and the second was that Riccio had not fully accepted responsibility for her actions. For example, in 2016, when talking to a psychologist, she said she had not been stalking Ruse. She had also given inconsistent statements to the parole board. Sometimes she gave inconsistent statements in a single hearing. For example, at her 2017 hearing, where she was granted parole, she said she bought the gun for her safety because Ruse had hired a hitman. Then minutes later, she admitted she bought the gun to kill Ruse. Since the decision was reversed in 2018, Riccio has been denied parole 3 times. The last time was in 2024. At the time of this recording, 64-year-old Linda Riccio is serving her sentence at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. The tentative date for her next parole hearing is July 2027. Number 2. Monica Mogg. In the autumn of 2012, 42-year-old Jung-Yi Kim, who also went by Lillian, lived in River Edge, New Jersey. She had lived there for about 10 years. She worked as an interior designer in New York City. Kim was divorced. That autumn, she was dating 42-year-old Arthur Donaldo Chan of Washingtonville, New York. Donaldo Chan was a project manager at IBM. He had 2 children from his first marriage. After he and his wife split up, Donaldo Chan started dating Monica Mogg, a preschool teacher. Mogg's first marriage, which produced 3 daughters, was abusive. Mogg had borderline personality disorder. Donaldo Chan's family said in the last years of their relationship, Mogg terrorized him. They said she used and manipulated him. Donaldo Chan and Mogg broke up after 10 years together. Mogg did not take the breakup well. On October 31, 2012, the police were asked to do a welfare check on Jung-Yi Kim. The day before, Hurricane Sandy had swept into the area. In the main bedroom, the police found the dead bodies of 42-year-old Kim and her boyfriend, 52-year-old Arthur Donaldo Chan. Donaldo Chan had been shot 6 times in the torso. Kim was stabbed 14 times with a hunting knife. 1 stab severed her jugular. Other stabs were 3 inches into her organs. Donaldo Chan's family told the police to investigate his former girlfriend, 49-year-old Monica Mogg. It turned out that Mogg's family had reported her missing. Hours after the bodies were discovered, Mogg was found in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, and arrested. In custody, she confessed to the murders. She said she started stalking the couple months earlier in June. She bought a .22 caliber rifle and did target practice. She was looking for a good opportunity to murder her ex-boyfriend. The night before the bodies were found, Hurricane Sandy was storming. Mogg said that night she entered Kim's home through an unlocked back door. She brought the rifle, a hunting knife, duct tape, and rope with her. She went into the main bedroom where she found Donaldo Chan and Kim. Noel DeChan had his back to her, and when he turned, she shot him 6 times. She claimed that she didn't plan on killing Kim, but they scuffled. Mogg said she pulled the knife out of her pocket and stabbed Kim until she fell to the floor. Kim fought desperately for her life. She managed to bite off part of Mogg's ear. She tossed the rifle and knife into the Hudson River. She planned on taking her own life, but she was arrested before that happened. After Mogg confessed, the police found the rifle, but they did not find the knife. The police said they did not believe Mogg when she said she didn't plan on killing Kim. Noel DeChan lived alone, and if she just wanted to kill him, she could have broken into his home. In June 2015, 2.5 years after the murders, Monica Mogg pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and stalking, among other charges. She had planned on pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, but changed her mind. She did not explain why she decided to plead guilty. In September 2012, Mogg was sentenced to 166 years of prison. Mogg's lawyers appealed. In May 2016, the appeals court ruled that the sentence was excessive. Months later, in October 2016, Mogg was resentenced to 80 years of prison. She will have to serve 85% of her sentence before she can apply for parole. She'll be eligible for parole in 2080 when she's 117 years old. Monica Mogg is currently 61 years old, and she is serving her sentence at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton, New Jersey. Number 1. Lisa Michelle Lambert. In the summer of 1991, 16-year-old Lori Sho lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania with her mother. Lori's parents, Hazel and John Sho, were divorced. Lori was a good student who wanted to be a nurse or a hairdresser after she got out of school. Over a week in the summer of 1991, Lori went on a few dates with 20-year-old Lawrence Youngkin. But then Youngkin raped her in his truck, and that was the end of the relationship. Youngkin went back to be with his former girlfriend, 17-year-old Lisa Lambert, who went by her middle name, Michelle. Michelle was pregnant with Youngkin's child. Lambert was a high school dropout who had been kicked out of her home. Her parents accused her of stealing money. Lambert and Youngkin lived in a trailer in the woods. When Lambert discovered that Lori had briefly dated Youngkin, she started stalking and harassing Lori. She would call Lori at home constantly and scream at her. Lambert would let the phone ring if Lori or her mother, Hazel, didn't answer the phone. The harassment got to be so bad that Hazel changed their phone number. Lori worked as a sales clerk at a dress shop at the local mall. Lambert started stalking her at work. She screamed and swore at her in front of customers. In July 1991, Michelle Lambert asked some friends for help. She wanted to lure Lori out of her home, cut off her hair, and tie her to a flagpole in town. 2 of the young women who were asked to help told Lori about the plan, so the plan was abandoned. That same month, Hazel went to the mall to pick up Lori. She saw Lambert grab her daughter and push her against a wall. Hazel made a police report. Weeks later, on August 20th, 1991, Hazel and Lori were shopping. Lori came up to them and started screaming at Lori. Hazel told Lambert to leave them alone or they would file rape charges against Youngkin. What Lambert didn't know was that weeks earlier, on July 31st, 1991, Lori had reported to the police that Youngkin had date raped her. For months, the stalking and harassment continued. On November 22, 1991, Lori was in the mall's parking lot with several friends. Suddenly, Lambert came up and attacked Lori. She slapped her and hit her head against the cab of a truck. Lambert accused Lori of ruining her life and her unborn baby's life. Lambert then said she had friends who would kill Lori if she told the police about the assault. Lori's mother filed a complaint with the police over the incident. A police investigation was not started until about a month later, on December 16th. An officer called Lambert's parents and asked them for her current address. They claimed they didn't know where she was. 2 days later, Lambert was talking to a friend, and she said she knew the police were after her for the assault. She said she was, quote, going to get Lori, unquote. On December 19, 1991, while at work, Hazel Show received a call from a woman. The woman said she was a guidance counselor at Lori's school. The woman told Hazel they had a problem with Lori and a boy, so she needed to come to the school the next morning to discuss it. Hazel agreed to come in. The next morning, Hazel left her condo just before 7 a.m. When she left, Lori was getting ready for school. Hazel arrived at the school and discovered that the guidance counselor was not there yet and no meeting had been scheduled. So Hazel drove home. When she got to the condo, a neighbor told her they had heard a loud commotion coming from her condo. Hazel got inside and found that there were signs of a struggle. A plant was overturned and Christmas cards were scattered on the floor. She found her 16-year-old daughter, Lori, lying in a pool of blood on her bedroom floor. A rope was tied around her neck. Hazel got a knife and cut the rope. That's when she saw that her daughter's throat had been slashed. Hazel held her dying daughter in her arms. Her daughter said, quote, "Michelle did it," unquote. She then told her mother she loved her. Then her 16-year-old daughter died in her arms. Lori had been stabbed several times in the torso. One punctured her lung, and another barely missed her spine. There was a 5-inch slit across her throat. It also appeared that some of her hair had been hacked off. Later that day, the police found 20-year-old Lawrence Youngkin and 19-year-old Michelle Lambert at a bowling alley where they were known to hang out. 17-year-old Tabitha Buck was with them. Buck was friends with Lambert. The police noticed that Buck had a fresh cut on her right cheek. The police asked her what happened to her face. Lambert spoke for her. She said they had fought with a group of girls earlier that morning. The trio was brought in for questioning. Tabitha Buck refused to give a statement. Michelle Lambert denied they were involved in the murder and they weren't in the area that morning. Lawrence Youngkin told the police that Lambert and Buck had killed Lori Show. He thought they were only going to beat her up. Youngkin said the night before the murder, he took Lambert to Kmart, where she purchased gloves, sunglasses, rope, and ski hats. He said that on the morning of the murder, he drove the two young women close to Lori's home and dropped them off. He then drove to a nearby McDonald's and had some breakfast. He stayed at the restaurant for about 15 minutes, then drove to a prearranged spot near Lori's home and picked up Lambert and Buck. They drove to the trailer he shared with Lambert. Youngkin told the police that Lambert had told him they accidentally stabbed Lori in the back, so they slit her throat to put her out of her misery. The two young women showered at the trailer. Then they drove Tabitha Buck to school. When they got home, he and Lambert washed the clothes, put them in a pink garbage bag, then threw the bag in a dumpster behind Kmart. He said they threw a bag containing the knife, some rope, and a pair of shoes into the river. The police found the bags in the dumpster and the river. The knife was from Lambert and Youngkin's set at home. The rope was similar to the rope around Lori's neck. Michelle Lambert was confronted with the evidence. She then admitted she was in Lori's home that morning. She had gone there to tell Lori she was going to stop harassing her. But then Tabitha Buck forced her way into the condo. Buck had the knife and the rope. Then Buck and Lori started fighting. Lori went for the phone and Buck knocked it away. Lambert said that Buck stabbed Lori in the back. Lambert said that after that, she left the room quickly. The detectives asked Lambert who slit Lori's throat. She told them she didn't know Lori's throat had been slit. She said that Buck must have done it after she left the room. 19-year-old Lisa Michelle Lambert and 17-year-old Tabitha Buck were charged with murder. Youngkin cut a deal with the prosecution. He agreed to testify against Lambert and Buck in exchange for 1 year in prison. In March 1992, while in custody, Lambert gave birth to a daughter. Michelle Lambert chose to be tried by a judge. If she were to be found guilty, she would have been sentenced to death. At her July 1992 hearing, the prosecution pointed out that Lambert had been stalking and harassing Lori for months. Lambert told several people she wanted to kill Lori. 3 people testified that on at least one occasion, Lambert said she wanted to slit Lori's throat. After Lambert assaulted Lori in the parking lot of the mall on November 22nd, Lambert told Lori she had friends who would kill her if she reported the assault. 4 days before the murder, the police called Lambert's parents looking for her. 2 days later, Lambert talked to a friend and told them she knew that the police were looking for her. She told a friend she was going to get Lori. Lambert's lawyer said that Lambert was innocent. Her lawyer claimed she was set up by her abusive boyfriend, Lawrence Youngkin, and her friend, Tabitha Buck. Lambert testified on her own behalf. Lambert admitted she had harassed and stalked Lori in the 6 months leading up to the murder, but claimed she had never said she wanted to slit her throat. She also maintained that she didn't kill her. She also admitted that she bought the items at Kmart, but claimed she bought them because she and Youngkin were going to chop down a Christmas tree later that day. Lambert said that Youngkin was the mastermind of the murder. He was worried that Lori's rape accusation was going to land him in jail. Lambert said that Youngkin wanted her and Buck to beat up Lori badly enough to put her in the hospital. Lambert told him it was a dumb idea because assaulting her like that would also land him in jail. Plus, she was 6 months pregnant and didn't want to risk hurting the baby. Instead, she suggested doing what they had planned to do when she first started harassing Lori, which is cut off her hair. Lambert testified that she and Buck waited outside Lori's condo. But then Buck got impatient and went to the condo. Lambert said she heard a scuffle. She entered the condo and found Lori on the floor with Buck on top of her. She said she held Lori's ankles. She told Lori to calm down because they just wanted to talk. Lori managed to get up and then ran to her bedroom. Buck took out the knife she was carrying and went after Lori. Buck stabbed her in the back, and Lambert claimed she tried to save Lori. She tried to pull Buck off of her, and when that didn't work, she tried to pull Lori away from Buck. Lambert said that blood got on her hands and it freaked her out. She ran from the room and collided with Youngkin. Youngkin ordered her to stay there. She said he went into the bedroom and slammed the door. She then heard more screaming. Then Buck and Youngkin exited the bedroom and the trio fled. As they drove away, they drove past Hazel's show. Youngkin was sure she saw him. The prosecution claimed that Lambert was lying. This was now her third story about what happened that morning. There was also no evidence that Youngkin entered Lori's home. 2 witnesses saw 2 women about the same height leaving Lori's condo that morning. Lambert and Buck were about the same height. Youngkin was notably taller than both women. Also, a McDonald's manager testified that she served Youngkin that morning between 7 and 7:15 a.m. and he stayed about 20 minutes. This confirmed Youngkin's alibi. While in custody awaiting trial, Lambert and Youngkin had been passing messages back and forth through the prison law library. There was one piece of paper with 29 questions that Lambert wrote for Youngkin. Many of the questions were oddly worded. Some of the questions included, quote, It's not my fault that things went wrong. Our prank, Friday morning. Do you even care? I still blame you and Tabby, unquote. Youngkin replied, quote, just wish it didn't happen, unquote. Another question was, quote, will you always stick with me as long as I still don't tell that you held Lori down for Tabby, unquote? He replied, quote, will always love you, unquote. A third question was, quote, are you absolutely sure that if I take the blame for you, I'll get less time? Absolutely sure, unquote. He wrote, quote, yes, unquote. Lambert and her lawyer argued that the 29 questions proved that Lambert was telling the truth, and that Youngkin was the mastermind, and he was in the condo that morning. Lambert testified she originally lied because she was protecting Youngkin, who was her boyfriend and the father of her child. But after reading his responses, she realized he didn't care about her and wasn't worth protecting. On the stand, Youngkin was asked if he had written the responses. He said he had written some of them, but others had been altered. He also said he didn't recognize several questions. An expert testified that the document did not appear to be altered, and there were two sets of handwriting, Lambert's and Youngkin's. The strongest testimony was from Lori's mother, Hazel. Hazel testified that Lori, with her dying breaths, said, quote, Michelle did it, unquote. The defense argued that, because of the 5-inch gash on Lori's throat, she wouldn't have been able to talk. But experts said it was possible. The trial lasted 7 days. The judge found 20-year-old Michelle Lambert guilty of first-degree murder. The judge pointed out that Lambert hated Lori, threatened to kill her in the past, and lied 3 times about the morning of the murder. He found the 29 questions document to be, quote, inconclusive and unreliable, unquote. He chose to spare Lambert's life and sentenced her to life without parole. Tabitha Buck went to trial several months later in September 1992. It was an 8-day trial, and Buck's lawyer argued that Buck wasn't at the crime scene that morning. He pointed out there was no physical evidence that placed her there. Lawrence Youngkin testified at the trial. Michelle Lambert was scheduled to testify, but she didn't. The trial lasted 8 days, and then the jury deliberated for 3 hours and 10 minutes. Tabitha Buck was found guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life without the chance of parole. The jury did not believe she was the mastermind of the murder, and she probably didn't even stab Lori Show. But they did think she was an accomplice. They did not think she had any reason to kill Lori other than that her friend, Michelle Lambert, wanted her dead. The district attorney said that Lawrence Youngkin had violated the terms of their plea bargain by committing perjury. During Lambert's trial, he was asked if he wrote the responses on the 29 questions document. Youngkin said that he had not written them all and that the document had been altered. However, the expert said that the document had not been altered and it was Youngkin's handwriting. So the district attorney said that the plea deal where he would serve a year was no longer valid. Instead, in October 1992, Youngkin pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Michelle Lambert appealed her conviction to 2 different courts, both of which were rejected. Then, in September 1996, Lambert sent a handwritten letter to U.S. District Attorney Judge Stuart Dazell. In the letter, she claimed she was framed for murder. She said proof of it was the 29 questions document. Judge Dazell announced that there would be an evidentiary hearing and appointed a lawyer to handle Lambert's case. On March 31, 1997, the federal evidentiary hearing began. Lambert's lawyers argued that Lambert had been set up. The real killers were Lawrence Youngkin and Tabitha Buck. They claimed that the sheriff's department, who investigated the case, framed Lambert to keep her quiet. Lambert alleged that 6 months before the murder, she was gang raped by 3 sheriff's deputies. The defense had an expert in abusive relationships testify. They said that Lambert had been abused and groomed by Youngkin. At the first trial, Youngkin admitted he had hit Lambert 3 times. The defense said that Lambert had lied to protect Youngkin. One of the strongest pieces of evidence was Lori's mother, Hazel, testifying that as Lori died, she said that Michelle did it. A speech expert testified that because of the wounds on Lori's neck, it would have been impossible for Lori to have said anything. The defense also said that the police ignored or did not disclose evidence to the defense. For example, the police said they did not find a pink trash bag when they searched the river, but there was a video of them finding the bag on the banks of the river. In the first trial, the prosecution said there was no evidence Youngkin was at the condo that morning. But Lori's mother and one of her neighbors saw Youngkin driving near the condo that morning. Lori's mother told a detective this, and she was told not to dwell on it. A second witness was a neighbor, and she said she saw Youngkin driving near the condo around the time of the murder when he was supposedly at McDonald's. After about 2 weeks of testimony, before Judge Giselle made his final ruling, he released Michelle Lambert to the custody of her lawyers. She had served about 5.5 years in prison. The hearing continued for another 4 days. The defense argued that there were other major problems with the case. For example, a telephone cord was wrapped around Lori's leg in the crime scene photos. The prosecution used the photos as evidence that Lori had been bound when she was attacked. But the paramedics did not remember seeing the cord around Lori's leg. Also, a police officer sketched the crime scene, but he did not draw the phone cord. The defense also said there were 2 sets of initials that Lori wrote in blood. It wasn't visible at the crime scene, but crime scene analysts enlarged some negatives and then saw them. The initials were TB and BY. TB stood for Tabitha Buck, and Lawrence Youngkin's nickname was Butch, so BY were his initials. The defense claimed Lori wrote the initials of her killers as she was dying. The prosecution admitted some mistakes were made in the case, but they were not huge mistakes that altered the facts of the case. The prosecution was adamant that there was no cover-up and Lambert had not been framed. After 14 days of testimony, Judge Giselle declared Lambert innocent. He concluded that 6 of the prosecution's witnesses had committed perjury. He also said that Lambert could never be tried again for Lori's murder. Judge Giselle said it was the worst case of misconduct he had ever heard of in the English-speaking world. Judge Giselle also requested that the FBI investigate the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office. A week later, a criminal probe was launched into the people involved in Lambert's prosecution. The state of Pennsylvania appealed the decision. They said a federal judge should not have intervened in a state matter. In December 1997, the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit overturned Judge Giselle's ruling. They determined that Lambert had not exhausted all her appeals at the state level, so a federal judge should not have heard her case. In early February 1998, after about 10 months of freedom, 25-year-old Michelle Lambert returned to prison. On April 29, 1998, there was a post-conviction hearing to determine if Lambert received a fair trial. The presiding judge was the same judge who found her guilty in 1992. The defense made similar arguments to those they made at the federal hearing. They claimed that Youngkin and Buck committed the murder, and the Sheriff's Department framed Lambert to cover up a gang rape committed by 3 deputies. As evidence of the conspiracy, they pointed to the crime scene photos being different from the police sketch. They argued to accomplish this, the police retrieved Lori's body from the morgue, then staged the body to fit their case against Lambert. The Pennsylvania State Attorney's Office was handling the case this time. They argued that the conspiracy made no sense. They said that the conspiracy was impossible. To make it possible, nearly 100 people needed to be involved. Many of those people had no connection to each other. They also had no reason to frame Lambert. Lambert's defense team said that the cover-up stemmed from alleged gang rape of Lambert. But one of the officers who was accused was out of state when Lambert claimed the rape happened. He was on his honeymoon. He had his wedding certificate and hotel receipts to back up his alibi. The prosecution also showed evidence that Lambert had a history of making rape accusations. She had accused 11 men, including family members, of rape. Tabitha Buck testified. She admitted she was the one who called Lori's mom and set up the fake appointment with the guidance counselor that lured her out of the home. Buck said that Youngkin dropped her and Lambert off. Then she and Lambert went into Lori's condo that morning. Buck said she held Lori down while Lambert stabbed her. She said that Lambert sawed her neck like it was a loaf of bread. Other evidence turned out to be invalid. For example, the FBI reviewed the crime scene photos. They did not see any initials written in blood. Also, the witness who saw Youngkin near the condo around the time of the murder was unreliable. She reported the sighting 6 months after the murder. In those 6 months, there was a lot of media coverage of the murder. She had a chance to read about the case before she said she saw Youngkin there that morning. The prosecution said that the case was straightforward. Lambert hated Lori because she had dated her boyfriend, so she stalked and harassed Lori for 6 months. Lambert threatened to kill Lori if she reported an assault to the police. 4 days after Lambert found out that the police were investigating the assault, Lori was murdered. The night before the murder, Lambert bought items used in the murder, like the rope. The murder weapon came from her kitchen. Then after the murder, she got rid of the evidence and lied to cover up her involvement. The hearing lasted 8 weeks. Then 2 months later, the judge released his 322-page opinion. He said that Lori was guilty and received a fair trial. He said the frame-up allegation was unbelievable. Michelle Lambert appealed the decision and it was denied. In 2003, her lawyers asked the Supreme Court to review her case and reinstate Judge Giselle's ruling. The Supreme Court chose not to review her case. In 2005, Michelle Lambert exhausted all her appeals. In August 2003, 32-year-old Lawrence Youngkin was paroled. He had served 12 years in prison. In November 2017, Tabitha Buck received a new sentence. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. Buck's new sentence was 28 years to life. In December 2019, after serving almost 28 years in prison, 45-year-old Tabitha Buck was released on parole. At the time of this recording, 52-year-old Lisa Michelle Lambert, who was 19 at the time of the murder, is serving her sentence at the Massachusetts Correctional Institution, Framingham. She does not have a chance at parole, so unless her sentence is changed, she will die in prison. Number 3. Andrea LeBay. In December 2004, 47-year-old Brian Langer and 26-year-old Andrea LeBay lived on a quiet street in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The couple had 3 children, 3-year-old Zoe, Bridget, who was turning 2 that month, and 7-month-old Margot. Brian was a successful businessman. He was the president of a company that sold software used in the printing of direct mail. He was called caring and professional. Andrea stayed home with the children, which she understandably found difficult. She was often tired and stressed out from dealing with the 3 children who were 3 and under. On December 1, 2004, a call came in to 911 from the family's home. It was 47-year-old Brian Langer. He said that his wife had stabbed him in the stomach. First responders raced to the family's home. What they found left them all shaken. Brian was in his bed, bleeding from his stomach. 3-year-old Zoe and Bridget, who was nearly 2, were in their bedroom. They were bleeding from their throats. Zoe did not have any vital signs, but Bridget did. 7-month-old Margot was unharmed in her bedroom. The dog had even been attacked. On the main floor was the body of 26-year-old Andrew LeBay. Andrea, Brian, Zoe, and Bridget were all rushed to the hospital. Andrea, Brian, and Zoe were all pronounced dead not long after arriving. Bridget regained consciousness and underwent emergency surgery. She ended up spending her second birthday in the hospital, but she ultimately survived. The police were able to piece together what happened that morning. While Brian was in bed, Andrea stabbed him in the stomach. She then walked by baby Margot's bedroom and went into the bedroom of her 2 eldest daughters. While they were sleeping, Andrea slit Zoe's throat and then stabbed Bridget in the throat. Andrea then went downstairs and slit her own throat. What the police couldn't understand was why Andrea tried to kill most of her family. Many people thought that Andrea was suffering from postpartum depression and that contributed to the murder-suicide. But the police would not comment on that. After the tragedy, a family member said that they would adopt Bridget and Margot. Number 2. Jacqueline Fusen. In 1988, the Fusen family lived in Las Chavas, New Mexico, which is a community about 30 miles south of Albuquerque. The family, which had lived in Carlsbad, New Mexico, moved into a modest pink stucco house about 2 years earlier. 45-year-old Thomas and 38-year-old Jacqueline had 4 children. Christopher was their oldest, and he lived in Alamogordo, New Mexico, which is about 180 miles from Las Chavas. 18-year-old Johnny, 12-year-old Mammy, and 10-year-old Amanda all lived at home. Thomas worked as a plumber, but he was having health problems. He needed surgery for a hernia. He had also been laid off a few times in the last several months. At around 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday, April 5, 1988, a neighbor found 38-year-old Jacqueline on her front doorstep. She was dead with a bullet wound in her chest. On her lap was a .22 caliber revolver. The neighbor called the police. Inside the master bedroom, they found the dead body of 45-year-old Thomas. He had been shot twice in the chest and once in the head. In another bedroom was the dead body of 18-year-old Johnny. In a third bedroom were the bodies of 12-year-old Mammy and 10-year-old Amanda. All 3 of the children had been shot in the head once. It appeared that Thomas and the children were all shot on Sunday night while they slept. Then, Jacqueline lived in the house with the dead bodies of her family for a day. She then took her own life on Monday night or Tuesday morning. Before Jacqueline shot herself, she wrote 2 letters. One was a short note explaining what should be done with the property and the dog. The second letter was addressed to the surviving Fusen son, Christopher. In the second letter, Jacqueline wrote about the family's financial problems. She wrote that Thomas needed surgery, but they didn't have any money to pay for it. She wrote that she was tired of living under the stress caused by the financial problems, and she didn't see any other way of dealing with it. She also wrote about how much she loved her children and how close her family was. She said she didn't want to see her family live apart. Finally, she wrote that she hoped that her family would meet later and be together and they wouldn't suffer anymore. Everyone who knew the family was shocked by the tragedy. Jacqueline's family said that they knew that she and Thomas were having money problems, but they never suspected that something like this would have happened. Number 1. Susan Hendricks. Liberty is a small city in northwest South Carolina. In 2011, it only had a population of about 3,200 people. The Hendricks family lived in 2 mobile homes on a quiet, rural street in Liberty. 48-year-old Susan Hendricks and 52-year-old Mark Hendricks had been married for 7 years. After they got divorced, they continued to be friends. They had 2 sons, 23-year-old Matthew and 20-year-old Marshall. Matthew was a welder who was planning on opening his own business. Marshall was an artist and he was getting ready to get married. Susan lived with her 64-year-old stepmother, Linda Burns, and her eldest son, Matthew. Susan's ex-husband, Mark, lived in a trailer next door. Marshall had been living on his own, but on October 12, 2011, he moved into the trailer where his father lived. Early on the morning of October 14, 2011, a call came in to 911 from a woman named Evelyn Burns. She is the sister of Susan Hendricks. Evelyn told the 911 operator that her entire family was dead. She was calling for the mobile home where Susan, Linda, and Matthew lived. When the first responders got there, they found 23-year-old Matthew dead in his bed. He had a gunshot wound on the side of his head. On the table next to his bed was a .380 caliber handgun. In another bedroom was the dead body of Matthew's step-grandmother, 64-year-old Linda Burns. She had been shot in the abdomen. Susan was unharmed, and she told the police that Matthew had shot himself. Susan gave the police a suicide note that had Matthew's signature on it. She said she found it on the kitchen counter. Evelyn told the police that they should probably check next door. Several officers went to the mobile home on the neighboring property. On the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, was the dead body of 20-year-old Marshall. Like his mother and step-grandmother, he had been shot to death. In the mobile home, on the couch, was the dead body of Matthew and Marshall's father, 52-year-old Mark. Both Marshall and Mark had been shot in the chest. The police interviewed the sisters, Evelyn and Susan. Evelyn explained that she had been at her own home when Susan called her and told her that Matthew had shot himself. She drove directly over and saw the dead bodies. She then called 911. Susan said that Matthew had a history of suicidal thoughts and substance abuse. She said that the last time she saw her family was several hours earlier when they had prayed because Matthew was upset because several people had forgotten his birthday. The police initially thought it could have been a murder-suicide, but they weren't entirely convinced. One odd thing was that the gun belonged to Susan, and she usually kept it in her nightstand. Also, if Matthew shot himself in the side of the head, how did the gun get to the nightstand? Wouldn't it have been in his hand? Or wouldn't it have been on the mattress where his body was found, or on the floor beside the bed? The nightstand seemed like a strange place to find the gun. So the police brought in forensic experts, and they did several tests. They noted that Matthew didn't have any gunshot residue on his hands or his clothes, but Susan's clothes were covered in gunshot residue. Also, Susan had recently taken out life insurance policies on her family, and they all named her as the beneficiary. In total, she was going to get over $700,000. The investigators looked at Susan's medical records and found out that she was very mentally ill. A week before the murders, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. She had also been receiving psychiatric treatment since the 1990s. Since 2002, she had been off work on disability because of her psychiatric problems. But perhaps what was most troubling was that Susan had killed a man before, and she bragged about getting away with it. On April 13, 2006, about 5.5 years before the mass shooting, the police were called to the same mobile home where Susan was living in 2011. When they arrived there, she was standing on her front porch with a revolver in her hand. Susan claimed she was getting ready to go out to take food to a family friend. Then suddenly, a neighbor who lived on the same road about half a mile away, 39-year-old Doyle O'Brien Teague, forced his way into her home. Susan said she told him to leave, but he refused to go, so she shot him. Susan claimed that she was acting in self-defense. The police never learned why Teague was in Susan's home. They also couldn't find any evidence to refute Susan's story about him entering her home without permission, so she wasn't charged with anything. The police ultimately concluded that Susan killed her stepmother, ex-husband, and her 2 sons for the insurance money. She was arrested 9 days after the murders. In April 2013, about 2 years after the murders, Susan pleaded guilty but mentally ill as part of a plea agreement. In the lead up to her sentencing trial, she was examined by a psychologist. The psychologist testified that before the age of 14, Susan had suffered horrible physical and sexual abuse at the hands of several family members and other people who knew her. The psychologist said it was some of the worst abuse he had ever heard of. He thought that Susan had post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative identity disorder, and several other mood disorders. Had Susan been found guilty of first-degree murder, she could have been sentenced to death. Instead, because of the plea agreement, she was sentenced to life without the chance of parole. At the time of this video, 58-year-old Susan Hendricks is serving her sentence at the Camille Graham Correctional Center in Columbia, South Carolina. Number 3. Dana Sue Gray. In February 1994, Norma Davis was 86 years old. Davis, who was a widow, lived alone in a gated community in Canyon Lake, California. On February 16, 1994, a neighbor became concerned because she had not seen Davis in 2 days. At the time, Davis was recovering from triple bypass surgery. The neighbor got into her home and she found Davis dead in a chair. Her murder had been brutal. She had been strangled and stabbed 11 times. 2 knives from her kitchen were still embedded in her body. Her throat had been slashed so severely that she was nearly decapitated. The police found no signs of a break-in or forced entry. So the police thought that Davis knew her killer or felt comfortable letting the killer into her home. In Davis's home, in some dust, the police found a shoe print. The footprint came from a small Nike shoe that most likely was a woman's shoe. Because it was from a woman's shoe, the police weren't sure if it was connected to the murder. No arrests were made in the wake of the murder. June Roberts lived in a gated mobile home community about half a mile away from Norma Davis. February 28, 1994 was Roberts' 66th birthday. Several people called her that day, but she didn't answer the phone. 2 of her friends went to her home and they found her dead body in a chair. She had been strangled with a telephone cord and beaten in the face with a wine bottle. There was no evidence that someone broke in or forced their way in. The police immediately suspected that the murders were connected. They happened within 12 days of each other, and the victims lived half a mile apart. Both victims were elderly women who lived alone in gated communities. They were both found dead in a chair, and they were strangled. Finally, it appeared that the victims knew the killer or felt comfortable letting the killer into their home. Just 10 days later, on March 10, 1994, Dorinda Hawkins was working alone in an antique store in Lake Elsinore, California. Lake Elsinore is 10 miles from Canyon Lake. A woman came in and she wanted to buy picture frames for her mother. Then suddenly, the woman attacked Hawkins and wrapped a phone cord around her throat. After Hawkins lost consciousness, the woman stole $5 from her wallet along with her credit cards. She also emptied the register, which had about $25 in it. She then left the store. Hawkins ended up surviving the attack, and she called the police. She described her attacker to a police sketch artist, and the sketch was printed in the newspaper and shown on the local news. The police thought that because she had been strangled with a telephone cord, her attack was possibly connected to the two murders, but once again, no arrests were made. Sun City, California is about 9 miles away from Canyon Lake, and in a lot of ways, the two cities are similar. They both have large populations of retirees, and there are plenty of golf courses nearby. 87-year-old Dora Beebe was one of the residents of Sun City. On March 16, 1994, just 6 days after Dorinda Hawkins was attacked, 87-year-old Beebe went to a doctor's appointment and then returned home. On that day, several years earlier, Beebe had lost her husband to cancer. After the death of her husband, she started dating a new man. In the spring of 1998, they had been together for 8 years. On the afternoon of March 16th, he went over to her home. He found her lying in a pool of blood in the bathroom. She had been strangled with a telephone cord, and she was struck 5 times in the head with an iron. There were no signs of a break-in or forced entry. It was clear to everyone in the area that a serial killer was preying on elderly women. The police knew that the killer, or possibly someone associated with the killer, was using the victim's credit cards. Using the credit cards, they would go on shopping sprees at department stores or go out to expensive restaurants. In some cases, they went out to the restaurant within an hour of the murder. Several people remembered that the person who used the credit cards was a woman in her 30s. She was white and had blonde, frizzy hair. Many people thought she looked like the sketch of the woman who attacked Dorinda Hawkins. Sometimes she had a young boy with her who was around the age of 5. One hairdresser remembered the woman coming into her shop after the sketch was released and asking for her hair to be dyed red. But the hairdresser said she couldn't do the dye job because the woman's hair was too frizzy and her hair could fall out. The lead detective on the case found out that a couple, Russell and Jerry Armbers, knew the first 2 victims. Jerry had been married to Norma Davis's son, Bill. Bill died in the 1980s, and Jerry continued to care for Davis even after her husband's death. Jerry had been at Davis's home just a few days before she was murdered. Jerry's second husband, Russell, had been good friends with June Roberts' husband before he died. After he died, Robert stopped going out as much, but Jerry and Russell still saw her every so often. The detective asked Jerry if she knew anyone who fit the description of the killer. At first, she said she didn't. Then on March 16, 1994, Jerry told the detective that the description sounded like her stepdaughter, 36-year-old Dana Sue Gray. Dana Sue Armbers was born in December 1960 in California. Her mother, Beverly, was a former beauty queen, and her father, Russell, was a hairdresser. Beverly was an erratic woman who abused prescription drugs. She would often max out her husband's credit cards. Beverly was a difficult person to get along with, and she didn't have a single friend in their neighborhood. One day, when Dana was 2 years old, her father came home and found Beverly physically fighting with a neighbor. They were rolling around in the gutter. This was the last straw for Russell, and he left Beverly shortly afterward. After that, Russell didn't see Dana much. Dana had behavioral problems at school. She would get into fights with other students, and she skipped quite a few days. When Dana was in her preteens, her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. Beverly died when Dana was 14. The time that her mother spent in the hospital inspired Dana to become a nurse. After the death of her mother, Dana moved in with her father. When Dana was 16, she became obsessed with skydiving. Dana ended up living with her father and stepmother for 2 years. But then Dana and her father got into a fight because he had found marijuana in her bedroom. She left home and moved in with her 23-year-old boyfriend. Dana graduated from high school in 1976 and then went to college. She got a degree in nursing in 1981. A few weeks after graduating, Dana got a job as a nurse at a hospital in Corona, California. In 1986, Dana's father, Russell, got married to Jerry. Not long afterward, Dana started dating a man named Tom Gray. Tom had 2 jobs. He was a professional ultralight aircraft pilot, and he was also a heavy equipment operator for a construction company. In August 1987, Tom and Dana bought a house together, and 2 months later, they were married. Their marriage wasn't without its share of problems. Dana liked to spend more money than they were making, and their financial problems led to fights. Dana also started to drink heavily. The couple tried to conceive for years. Dana got pregnant twice, but she ended up miscarrying both times. In early 1991, Tom, who had played drums for years, started a new band. One of the band members was a man named Jim Wilkins, and he had a young son named Jason. In the spring of 1992, Tom and Dana split up. Over the next several months, Dana would jump back and forth between living with Jim Wilkins and Tom. In early 1993, Dana and Tom's relationship was officially over, and she moved in with Jim. She was drinking more than she had been with Tom, and she was abusing prescription drugs. To support her drug habit, Dana stole drugs from her workplace. In the summer of 1993, Dana and Tom filed for divorce. They also filed for bankruptcy. In November 1993, Dana was fired from her job at the hospital because the staff had figured out she was stealing drugs. About 4 months later, the murders started. After Dana was identified by her stepmother as the possible killer, she was arrested and her home was searched. They found Dora Beebe's credit card and a bunch of newly purchased items. Some of the items have been purchased using June Roberts' credit card. Dana Gray was charged with the murders of June Roberts and Dora Beebe. She was the prime suspect in the murder of Norma Davis, but the case against her wasn't as strong as the other two murders. If she were to be convicted of the two murders, she would have been sentenced to death, so the police and the district attorney felt that charging her with the two murders was good enough. Initially, Dana Gray pleaded not guilty. But then, a year later, in March 1995, she pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Dana ended up talking to several psychiatrists about the murders. She said that she killed the women because she was addicted to shopping. After every attack, she went on a shopping spree with her victims' credit cards. Dana knew June Roberts because her father and stepmother were friends with her. She got into Roberts' home by telling her she wanted to borrow a book about dealing with her alcoholism. As Roberts looked for the book, Dana attacked her. As she was murdering the 66-year-old woman, the 5-year-old son of her boyfriend, Jason Wilkins, was sitting in her car outside of Roberts' home. After the murder, they went out for lunch, and Dana got Jason a haircut. The only person Dana murdered that she didn't know was Dora Beebe. Dana explained that she knocked on Beebe's door and told her she was lost. Beebe let Dana inside, and while she looked for a map, Dana attacked her. On September 9, 1998, Dana Gray shocked everyone by pleading guilty to the murders of June Roberts and Dora Beebe. In exchange for pleading guilty, she received life without parole. At the time of this video, 62-year-old Dana Sue Gray is incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. Number 2. Juana Braza. In 1998, 3 elderly women in Mexico City, Mexico were murdered. They had been strangled to death with some type of ligature, like a cable or tights. At the time, the murders were not big news in Mexico City. The city's murder rate was high, and the victims weren't high profile, so the murders did not garner much media attention. Over the next 4 years, more elderly women in Mexico City were strangled to death. It was usually 2 to 3 per year. Once again, they weren't major news stories. In 2003, depending on the source, there was 9 to 12 murders. They were all elderly women who were strangled with some type of ligature. Usually, they were strangled with something that happened to be laying around the victim's home. In November 2003, the people realized that there might be a serial killer who was preying on elderly women. One reason it took the police so long to determine that there was a serial killer is that serial murders are relatively rare in Mexico. The police assumed that the serial killer was a man. They called him El Malvajitas, or the Little Old Lady Killer. The police thought that the serial killer was a man, even though several people saw someone around the crime scenes around the time of the murders, and they said that the killer was a woman. They said she was tall and stocky with short hair. In December 2003, they released a sketch of the killer. The police thought that the killer was a man who disguised himself by dressing up like a female nurse. He would gain entry to their homes by pretending to be someone with an economic assistance program for senior citizens. However, at the time, the police didn't make this information public. Also, besides releasing the sketch, they did not do much to investigate the serial murders. In 2004, 2 people were arrested for the murders of elderly women. In April, a woman gained access to the home of an elderly woman and strangled her to death. In September, a man who disguised himself as a female nurse got into the home of two elderly women. He strangled both to death with a pair of tights. But neither of these people was the serial killer. The serial killer had left their fingerprints at many of the crime scenes. The fingerprints of the two killers did not match the serial killer's fingerprints. Depending on the source, it's believed that another 14 to 17 elderly women were strangled to death in 2004. By August 2005, it was thought that the victim count had reached 41. That month, the police decided to step up their investigation. They released 2 more sketches. They also spoke for the first time publicly regarding the killer's MO. They said that the killer was gaining entrance to the victim's home by dressing like a female nurse and saying he was from a social benefit program. They also said that the killer was a gay man. The murders also became a political issue. One political party said that serial killer was on the loose and not enough was being done to catch him. The other group said that there was no serial killer and it was just a panic created by their opponents. In the latter part of 2005, a special task force was started to find the serial killer. In October 2005, 46 people, mostly male sex workers and transvestite sex workers, were arrested. They were released after their fingerprints didn't match the serial killer's fingerprints. 3 weeks later, 59 transvestites were arrested. They were all cleared as suspects. In November 2005, the police released a 3D model bus based on the description of the killer. But it did not lead to an arrest. By the end of 2005, it's believed that 48 women, all over the age of 60, were murdered by the same person. On January 25, 2006, a man came home in the middle of the day. He was renting a room from 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro. When he came home, he noticed a woman walking out of the door. When he got inside the home, he found his landlady dead. She had been strangled to death with a stethoscope. The man started screaming and he chased after the woman. 2 police officers were in the area and they came to the man's aid. They arrested the woman. She was identified as 48-year-old Juana Barraza. Barraza was born in December 1958 in a small town outside of Mexico City. Her mother was an abusive alcoholic. When she was 12, her mother sold her to a man for 3 beers. Barraza became pregnant for the first time when she was 16. She gave birth to a son. She went on to have 3 more children. When her eldest son was 12 years old, he was mugged by a group of drunk men. The men ended up killing him. Barraza witnessed the murder. For work, Barraza was a maid and sold popcorn. She was also a professional wrestler. She wrestled under the name La Dama de Silencio, which translates to the Silent Lady. On March 31, 2008, although Barraza was the suspect in 49 murders, she was convicted of 16 murders. She was convicted in those cases because her fingerprints were found at the crime scene or eyewitnesses placed her there. She was sentenced to 793 years of prison, which is the longest prison sentence for any killer in Mexico. However, Mexico has a maximum of 50-year sentence for life imprisonment. so she could be released in 2057. If she lives that long, she'll be 100 years old. Juana Barraza is considered Mexico's first female serial killer. Her arrest and conviction were big news in Mexico. In 2015, Barraza was in the news again because she was getting married. A 74-year-old man who was incarcerated in the same prison had romantically wooed her through letters. The man was serving a sentence for murdering another man in the prison. News of the marriage was big in the Mexican tabloids, who hailed it as a bizarre love story. But then, just over a year later, Barraza filed for divorce. She revealed that she and her husband had never laid eyes on each other before they got married. In the year following the wedding, they only saw each other 3 times for about 40 minutes total. Juana Barraza is still incarcerated. She apparently sells tacos that are popular among the inmates. Number 1. Shirley Winters. Shirley Barron was born in February 1958 in South Onondaga, New York. She was the third of 4 children. Her father was a drywall contractor and her mother was a homemaker. At the beginning of January 1966, Shirley was 7 years old. Her brother Peter was 11, her sister Joyce was 10, and her sister Lita was 4. On the night of January 25th, 1977, 7-year-old Shirley stayed at her maternal grandparents' home. Their home was about half a mile away from her family's home. That night, her father was out of town on a job. Shirley's mother, Marilyn, was home with the 3 other children. Marilyn's father, Lloyd, called Marilyn at about 11:30 that night, and nothing seemed to be wrong. The next morning, at 8:30, Lloyd called his daughter again. He wanted to tell her that the school bus was delayed by half an hour because of the weather. But no one answered the phone. He assumed that they were just getting ready for school, and he didn't think of it again. That evening, another one of the children was supposed to spend the night at the grandparents' home. But they didn't show up, and no one at the house answered the phone. Lloyd called Marilyn's sister and her husband. They had children who attended school with the Barron children. They learned that Peter, Joyce, and Lita didn't attend school that day. Lloyd asked them to go check on the family. When they got there, they found that the house was dark and locked up. They broke a window and got into the home. In one bedroom, they found 32-year-old Marilyn on the floor at the foot of the bed. In the bed were the bodies of 10-year-old Joyce and 4-year-old Lita. In another bed in a different bedroom was the body of 11-year-old Peter. Marilyn's sister and her husband called for help. Marilyn was taken to the hospital and placed in intensive care. Sadly, it was too late for the children. They had all died from carbon monoxide poisoning. The police investigated, and they believed that one of the family's dogs got into a crawl space under the house. The dog damaged one of the furnace pipes, which created a blockage. As a result, carbon monoxide leaked into the cellar and then it seeped into the rest of the house. Marilyn Barron survived the ordeal. Shirley Barron was left as an only child. 11 years later, in 1977, when Shirley was 18 years old, she married a man named Ronald Winters Jr. That following year, Shirley was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for the first time. She was released after an undisclosed amount of time. As the summer of 1979 was coming to an end, Ronald and Shirley had 2 children, 3-year-old Colleen and 18-month-old John. On September 12, 1979, the family was staying at Shirley's parents' cottage on Hyde Lake in Teresa, New York. That afternoon, Ronald was at work. Shirley said she was asleep on the couch when a fire broke out. Her 2 children, Colleen and John, were in a bedroom. Shirley said that after the fire broke out, she tried to get into the bedroom, but she couldn't. A neighbor and his son came to help. They also tried to get into the bedroom, but they couldn't. The neighbor ended up being hospitalized with cuts and bruises. Sadly, Colleen and John Winters did not survive the fire. There was an investigation into the fire, but no source could be found. It was labeled as suspicious. Ronald's parents came to the site of the fire as soon as they heard about it. Ronald's mother noticed that Shirley didn't smell like smoke. There was something else odd about the fire. The day before, there had been a house fire about 50 miles from the cabin. Leo and Pam Gotham's family lived in Russell, New York. A fire broke out in their home, and 3 of their children, 13-year-old Leo, 9-year-old Patty, and 5-year-old Zan, were all killed. 2 of their other children were placed in the hospital. One had burns on 60 to 70% of her body, but she survived. At the time, the investigators thought that the fire was started by a piece of kindling that got away from the wood stove. Why this is odd is that Shirley was good friends with the Gothams, and she had visited them several times at their home. Shortly after Shirley and Ronald's children died, they split up. But when the fire happened, Shirley was pregnant. She gave birth to a son named Ronald Winters III on June 18, 1980. 5 months later, in November 1980, Shirley and the baby were living in a trailer in Otisco, New York. On November 21st, Shirley called 911 because 5-month-old Ronald had stopped breathing. He was later pronounced dead. The cause of death was labeled as sudden infant death syndrome, also known as SIDS. After the death of her 3rd child, Shirley moved into a different trailer in the same park. On January 3, 1981, the fire department was called to the trailer. A fire had been started in 2 different areas of her trailer. The trailer fire was considered arson. Just over a month later, on February 10, 1981, there was another fire in the trailer where Shirley was living. This time, she was charged with 3rd-degree arson. Nearly 20 months later, on November 9, 1982, Shirley's trailer once again caught fire. She was again charged with 3rd-degree arson. She pleaded guilty to criminal mischief for both charges, and she was given 3 years of probation. Although Ronald and Shirley had split up, they continued to see each other, and they were physically intimate. On May 24, 1984, Shirley gave birth to a daughter, Joy. Less than a year later, on May 2, 1985, she gave birth to a daughter, Ashley. In November 1986, Shirley and her 2 daughters were living in an apartment complex in Marcellus, New York. On November 12th, the building caught fire and it was destroyed. No deaths or injuries were reported. The cause of the fire wasn't determined, but was labeled suspicious. On October 3, 1987, Shirley gave birth to a son, Clayton. Not long afterward, Shirley and Ronald finalized their divorce. Shirley and her 3 children moved into an apartment inside a house in Syracuse, New York. A month later, on November 2nd, 1989, a fire broke out in the building's storage area. Shirley managed to get her 2 youngest children, Ashley and Clayton, out of the building, but she claimed she lost Joy in the confusion. Luckily, Joy, who was 5 years old, managed to make it out by herself. Joy later said that she was in her mother's bed when the fire started. She said that her mother told her to stay in the bed, but she decided to get out. Investigators determined that the fire was an act of arson. Months later, on January 8, 1990, there was yet another fire in the home where Shirley and her children lived. Once again, it was determined that the cause of the fire was arson. After this fire, Shirley lost custody of her 3 children, and they were sent to live with their father, Ronald. Shirley subsequently checked herself into a psychiatric hospital. She was charged with arson regarding the fire in November 1989, where her daughter Joy almost died. Between March 1990 and October 1990, 3 more fires broke out in the homes where Shirley was living. In November 1990, she was charged with arson again, and she was held in jail while she awaited her trial. Her trial ended in a mistrial because the jury was deadlocked. At her second trial in August 1991, she was acquitted. In November 1991, about 2 months after Shirley was acquitted, she was charged with arson for the 4th time. This fire happened at a bowling alley in Camillus, which is a town in New York. Not much damage was done, and luckily no one was hurt. It's unclear what happened with those charges. In February 1997, Shirley's mother, Marilyn, who was a widow, died in a car accident. Shirley inherited her house in Onondaga. A few months later, on April 27, 1997, Shirley and her cousin were living in the house. Suddenly, a fire broke out. Both Shirley and her cousin got out of the house unharmed. Once again, Shirley was charged with arson. In August 1997, she pleaded guilty to second-degree arson. She was sentenced to 8 years of prison. Shirley Winters was paroled sometime in 2004. But then, a lighter was found in her possession, which was a violation of her parole, so she was sent back to prison. Shirley was paroled again in September 2005. At the end of November 2008, Shirley was living with some friends in Pierpoint, New York. Also living there was her friend's daughter, Connie Gollinger, and her grandson, Ryan Rivers. On November 28, 2008, Ryan was just 3 days shy of his 2nd birthday. At about 5 p.m., Ryan's mother, Connie, went to check on Ryan, who should have been in the playroom. Along the way to the playroom, she passed the washroom and saw Shirley walk out of it. Connie didn't find Ryan in the playroom, so she started looking around the house. She found Ryan lying on his back in the bathtub in 2 inches of water. He was not breathing. Ryan was rushed to the hospital, but sadly, he was pronounced dead not long afterward. At first, the family thought that his death was just a tragic accident. But they thought that the accident was very bizarre. When Connie found her son, he was lying on his back in the tub that had 2 inches of water in it. So the water wasn't above his face. Only his backside and his hair were wet. His shoes were dry. Also, Ryan was afraid of water, so they thought it was odd he would get into the tub by himself. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was drowning. After the autopsy, the body was sent to a funeral home. The funeral director noticed suspicious bruises on the boy's body. Because of the bruises, a second autopsy was performed. The medical examiner thought that Ryan had too much water in his lungs. Had he accidentally drowned, there would have been less water. The medical examiner also found traces of rubbing alcohol in Ryan's bloodstream. The medical examiner thought that someone may have rendered Ryan unconscious with the alcohol and then drowned him in the bathtub or the toilet. After the autopsy, the body was sent back to the funeral home, and 12 days after Ryan's death, a wake was held for him. At the wake, his aunt noticed strange bruises on his forehead. After Ryan's death, Shirley moved into a trailer. A few weeks after she moved there, a neighboring trailer caught on fire. Shirley attempted suicide by overdosing on pills shortly after the fire, but she survived. In February 2007, investigators from 3 counties discussed Shirley Winters and her seemingly tragic past. In 1979, 2 of her children were killed in a suspicious house fire. This was the day after her friend's 3 children were killed in a house fire. Since 1979, 18 suspicious fires broke out when Shirley was around. 2 years after her children were supposedly killed in the deadly blaze, her 5-month-old baby supposedly died when she was alone with him. Then Ryan Rivers mysteriously drowned in a home where Shirley happened to be staying. Was Shirley Winters just incredibly unlucky, or was something more sinister going on? The police thought that there was just too many coincidences, and they started investigating all the deaths. In March 2007, the police had the bodies of Shirley's 3 children exhumed. 2 weeks later, Shirley Winters was charged with second-degree murder regarding the death of her son, Ronald Williams III, who died in November 1980. The autopsy revealed he had been smothered. The autopsies also revealed that Colleen and John, who died in 1979, had suffered blunt force trauma injuries to the head before the fire was started. But she was not charged in connection with these deaths. In August 2007, Shirley was charged with second-degree murder for the drowning death of 23-month-old Ryan Rivers. Shirley ended up making a plea deal. In April 2008, Shirley pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in both cases. As part of the plea deal, the district attorney would not charge her in connection with the murders of Colleen and John. For the death of Ryan Rivers, Shirley was sentenced to 20 years of prison. Regarding the death of her son, Ronald, she was sentenced to 8 years and 4 months to 25 years in prison. She was allowed to serve both sentences concurrently. Shirley Winters was also investigated for the deadly blaze in 1979 that killed the 3 Gotham children the day before her 2 children were killed. The police did not find any evidence to connect her to the fire. The Gotham family was asked if they thought if Shirley started the fire. They said that they did not think so, and they did not see her that day. Shirley has never been charged with any crimes related to that fire, and at the time of this video, there are no plans to charge her with any further crimes. Criminologists think that Shirley Winters is unique for several reasons. First, she is a female serial killer, which is rare. Only about 10% of serial killers are female. Secondly, she is not just a serial killer, but she is also a serial arsonist. It is very uncommon for someone to be both a serial arsonist and a serial killer. At the time of this video, 62-year-old Shirley Winters is incarcerated at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in Bedford Hills, New York. She'll be able to apply for parole in January 2024. Number 3. Jennifer San Marco. Jennifer San Marco was born in December 1961 in Brooklyn, New York. She was described as shy, and she mostly kept to herself, but she did play with other children on occasion. She attended both Brooklyn College and Rutgers University, but she didn't graduate from either. In 1989, San Marco moved to the West Coast. San Marco usually didn't stay at one job for very long. For a while, she was a correctional officer at Chuckawalla Valley State Prison in Blythe, California. Then she got a job as a police dispatcher in Santa Barbara, California. In 1997, she landed a job sorting mail at the U.S. Postal Department's Mail Distribution Center in Goleta, California. For the first time, she settled into her job. She bought a condo in Santa Barbara, not far from her workplace. She generally kept to herself, but she would join in conversations with coworkers when opportunities arose. Around 2001, San Marco's coworkers noticed a change in her personality. She became withdrawn, irritable, and she would talk to herself. One day, she made a disturbing comment to a coworker. The coworker reported the comment, and San Marco was told to come to the manager's office. She refused and then caused a scene. The police were called, and San Marco was taken into custody. She was held for 72 hours for a psychiatric evaluation. Afterward, San Marco was allowed to return to work, but she had to keep away from her coworker. Jennifer San Marco remained at the distribution center for 2 more years. Then in June 2003, she was forced to retire for medical reasons. A month later, she sold her condo. She told several people she was going to visit her sister who lived back east. She then drove away from Goleta in her car. Her car broke down near Grants, New Mexico, so she decided to stay there. It wasn't long before her neighbors in Grants started to notice her strange behavior. This included talking to herself and getting down on her knees to pray in the middle of the road. One time, she was pulled over by the police while driving her car. She was half naked in the car. One day, San Marco walked into the Milan Village Administrator's office. She said she wanted a business license. She planned on starting a paper called The Racist Press. She wanted to use the paper to publish her bizarre conspiracy theories. For example, she believed that the government could control people and force them to kill other people. She was ultimately denied the business license. In August 2005, San Marco went to a pawn shop, and despite having a history of mental illness, she purchased a 9mm handgun. On January 30th, 2006, 44-year-old Jennifer San Marco was in Santa Barbara. She went to her old condo, where she confronted her former neighbor, 54-year-old Beverly Graham. They had previously shared a wall. While San Marco lived there, the two women had feuded. Graham was often annoyed when San Marco loudly ranted and raved. San Marco shot her former neighbor several times. She then got back into her pickup truck and drove to Goleta. She managed to get into the parking lot of the distribution center where she used to work by following another vehicle through the entrance gate. She then found an employee, and at gunpoint, she made him hand over his ID badge. The employee then ran off. San Marco used the badge to get into the building. It is believed that she first shot 37-year-old Z. Fairchild, 28-year-old Malika Higgins, and 42-year-old Nicola Grant. Several employees were in the break room and they heard the gunshots. They stepped out of the break room and San Marco smiled as she walked by them. San Marco then walked to her old desk where 44-year-old Charlotte Colton was working. She shot the mother of three in the head. She then walked down the aisles and murdered 42-year-old Guadalupe Shorts and 57-year-old Dexter Shannon. Then 44-year-old Jennifer San Marco shot herself in the head. Every person that San Marco shot died. Her rampage left 8 people dead, including herself. Beverly Graham's body was not found until the next day. No one is sure why San Marco killed the people that she did. But based on papers found at her home, San Marco believed that she was the target of a conspiracy theory because of her employment at the mail sorting facility. The brutal mass murder shocked the people of Santa Barbara and Goleta. Many people knew that Jennifer San Marco had a mental health condition, but no one thought she would ever hurt anyone. Number 2. Catherine Schock. Catherine Dempsey was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1894. After high school, Catherine attended nursing school in Dunkirk, New York. In nursing school, she was engaged to another man, but then she met Donald D. Schock and she fell in love with him. They got married in 1917. But the marriage didn't last and they were divorced 3 years later. However, they got back together 4 years later and remarried. In 1928, Catherine gave birth to a son, James. Donald and Catherine's second attempt at marriage was not more successful than their first. They divorced again in 1931. After that, Catherine went back into nursing. She and James lived with her sister, Ruth Hughes, in Dunkirk, New York. Ruth and her husband were separated, and Ruth helped Catherine take care of James. Then, tragically, James died from an illness in November 1934. He was just 7 years old. Catherine was devastated by the loss of her only son. As Christmas approached, she understandably became more depressed. Despite Catherine's unbelievable grief, she planned on spending Christmas with her brother, Walter Dempsey, his wife, Clara, and their 4 sons. They lived in Perrysville, which is just outside of Pittsburgh. A week before Christmas, Catherine traveled from her home in Dunkirk to Buffalo, New York. She bought some gifts for her family. She also bought a revolver. On December 23rd, Catherine took a cab 200 miles from Dunkirk to Perrysville. The cab driver refused to take a tip and told Catherine that he would call her if he ever needed a nurse. Catherine told him she wouldn't be around anymore. Catherine walked into her brother's family's home with an armful of gifts. They enjoyed the afternoon and evening together. In the early morning hours of Christmas Eve, 38-year-old Catherine Schock picked up the revolver she had purchased a week earlier. She went into the master bedroom and shot her 42-year-old brother, Walter. The gunshot woke up Clara and she tried to run. Catherine managed to shoot her in the side of the head. Catherine then went into the bedrooms of her nephews, 12-year-old Robert, 10-year-old Walter Jr., 8-year-old Thomas, and David, who was 15 months old. She shot all 4 of her nephews. Despite being shot in the head, Clara managed to make it out of the house and started screaming for help. One of their neighbors heard her and took Clara to a nearby doctor's office. He then returned to the family's home. Everyone else in the house was dead. This included 38-year-old Catherine Schock. She was found dead at the foot of her brother's bed. It was determined she died by suicide by drinking cyanide. The police found 4 handwritten notes on the dining room table. In all the notes, Catherine explained that she was devastated by the loss of her son and she couldn't go on with her life. But she doesn't explain why she chose to kill her brother and his family. The police in Dunkirk went to the home Catherine shared with her 37-year-old sister, Ruth Hughes. No one answered the door, so officers forced their way inside. In the home, they found Ruth's dead body. She had been shot to death. The medical examiner thought she had been dead at least 2 days. That meant Catherine killed her sister and then went to her brother's home. This brought Catherine Schock's body count to 7, including herself. Catherine claimed she committed the mass murder because she was devastated by the loss of her only son. The tragically ironic aspect of the story was that there was a lone survivor of the mass murder. That was Clara, Walter's wife and the mother of Robert, Walter Jr., Thomas, and David. She had to live with the loss of her entire family. Number 1. LaFonda Foster and Tina Powell. LaFonda Faye Foster and Tina Marie Powell met in the mid-1980s when they were both in their 20s and living in Lexington, Kentucky. They eventually started dating. The two women had a history of drug and alcohol addiction. Foster was also a sex worker. On April 23, 1986, 27-year-old Powell and 22-year-old Foster partied through much of the day. That evening, they went looking for more drugs and alcohol. They went to the apartment of 73-year-old Carlos Kearns and his 45-year-old wife, Virginia Kearns. The couple had a live-in housekeeper, 59-year-old Trudy Harrell. Foster and Powell were friends with Virginia. Virginia convinced Carlos to give them a check for $25. Carlos was semi-disabled and he couldn't drive to the bank. Virginia was very drunk, so she couldn't drive either. So Powell, Virginia, and Harrell went and got Carlos's car. While they were out, 47-year-old Roger Keene and 52-year-old Theodore Sweet arrived at the Kearns' apartment. Foster, Carlos, Keene, and Sweet then went out to the car. Foster drove to a bait shop where the manager cashed the check. Then they went to the home of a man named Lester Lutterell. Lutterell got into a fight with Foster and Powell. Foster was armed with a .22 caliber handgun and she fired a shot through one of Lutterell's windows. Then they drove off. No one was hit by the bullet. Foster then drove to a field and everyone was ordered out of the car. In the field, 73-year-old Carlos Kearns, 45-year-old Virginia Kearns, and 59-year-old Trudy Harrell were all stabbed and shot. The Kearnses were not fatally injured. The Kearnses and Keene and Sweet, who were unharmed, were ordered to get back into the car. Harrell had been stabbed 5 times in the face and the chest, and her throat had been slit. She had also been shot in the back of the head. Powell then ran over her with the car, and her body was dragged 225 feet into a nearby parking lot. Then they drove to a paint store and parked the car behind it. Virginia Kearns was pulled out of the car. She was stabbed some more, and her throat was slit. In total, she was stabbed 16 times in the neck area. Amazingly, the stabs and the gunshot wound didn't kill her. Powell then ran over her, and this is what finally killed her. Foster and Powell then drove around with the 3 men for a while. Then they drove to another field and forced them to get out of the car. 47-year-old Roger Keene was shot 3 times in the head. 52-year-old Theodore Sweet was shot in both ears. Carlos Kearns, who was 73 years old, was shot twice in the head. All the men's throats were slit as well. Afterward, the car was driven over them, but became stuck on Keene. While he was pinned under the car was set on fire. LaFonda Foster and Tina Powell then walked to a nearby hospital. Powell went to call a cab from a payphone, and Foster went to the washroom, where she washed some of the blood off. A nurse noticed that both women were splattered with blood, so she called the police. Officers happened to be in the hospital on an unrelated matter. They came and questioned the women. When they did, the officers could smell alcohol on them. Then Foster and Powell became belligerent, so they were arrested. At the jail, Foster managed to trade her bloodstained pants with another inmate's pants. The next day, all 5 bodies were found. That same day, the pants that Foster was wearing when she committed the murders were retrieved, and in the pockets were .22 caliber bullets. Soon, the 2 women were linked to all 5 murders. One thing that connected all the murders was that all the victims were shot with the same .22 caliber handgun. Several people saw Powell and Foster with a handgun on the night of the murders. Also, the victims had been stabbed and cut with the same knife. Earlier that night, Powell had tried to sell the knife to a group of people. While in jail, Foster confessed to the murders to another inmate. They said they wanted to kill the women because they were bitches. Then they had to kill the men because they had seen too much. Foster talked about laughing when they committed the murders. She also said she was as good of a cult leader as Charles Manson. Tina Powell and LaFonda Foster went to trial in February 1987. Powell's lawyer said that Powell was a battered victim of Foster. The lawyer claimed that Powell only participated in the murders because she feared her abusive partner would kill her if she didn't. Foster's lawyer said that Foster was so wasted that she had no idea what was going on. The trial lasted about 3 weeks, and then over 3 days, the jury deliberated for 21 hours. They were both found guilty of all 5 murders. Tina Powell was sentenced to 5 life sentences. She was able to apply for parole after 25 years. LaFonda Foster was sentenced to death. She was only the second woman in the 20th century to be sentenced to death in Kentucky. The first woman was Laverne O'Brien, who was convicted in 1980 of poisoning 2 of her husbands. O'Brien's death sentence was commuted to life in prison in 1980. LaFonda Foster's date with the electric chair was supposed to be April 22, 1988. But her lawyers appealed, and her execution date was pushed back. The appeal argued that Foster and Powell should have been tried separately. In December 1991, the Kentucky Supreme Court quashed her death sentence, and she was ordered to have a new sentencing hearing. For years, there was a legal battle regarding the sentencing hearing. In 1996, Foster said she was sick of being in jail 23 hours a day alone, and she was ready to die. Another 3 years went by. Then, in January 1999, nearly 7 years after her death sentence was reversed, Foster agreed to a plea deal. She accepted life in prison without the chance of parole. At the time of this video, 63-year-old Tina Powell is serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women in Shelby County, Kentucky. She was first eligible to apply for parole in April 2011. It was deferred for 10 years. She was able to apply again in April 2021. Her parole was denied and was ordered she would have to serve out the rest of her sentence in prison. LaFonda Foster is 58 years old and she is serving her sentence at the same prison. Both women will most likely die in prison. Number 5. Anna Zwanziger. Anna Zwanziger was born on August 7, 1760, in Bavaria. When she was young, she was physically attractive, and she aspired to marry a man of worth. Instead, she married an alcoholic who died when she was just 30 years old. The widow Zwanziger needed a job, and she wanted a husband. She thought she could attain both when she took a job at the home of a judge as a maid. One roadblock on Zwanziger's path to marriage was the fact that the judge was already married. To eliminate the competition, Schwarzenegger poisoned the judge's wife with arsenic. In the month after his wife died, the judge didn't show any romantic interest in Schwarzenegger, so she moved on to another judge's house. This time, she poisoned the 30-year-old judge to the point where he became seriously ill. She then nursed him back to health. Once he was healthy, she again started to poison him. This time, she killed him. Schwarzenegger moved on to a third judge's house in the spring of 1808. This judge was also married, and his wife was pregnant. On May 13, 1808, she gave birth to a daughter. 3 days after giving birth, the judge's wife suddenly became ill. She died a week after giving birth. On her deathbed, she accused Schwarzenegger of poisoning her, but no one took her accusation seriously. Schwarzenegger continued to work for the judge over the summer. On 2 separate occasions that summer, guests of the judge became violently ill. After the second incident, Schwarzenegger was fired, but amazingly, she was given time to finish up some work she was doing. Just before she left, she made coffee for 2 other housekeepers and was able to give the baby some cookies and milk. It was all laced with arsenic. Both housekeepers survived, but the 5-month-old girl did not. After doing all this harm to the families of judges, Schwarzenegger finally came to the attention of the authorities, and she was arrested in 1809. She was convicted of murder, and she was sentenced to death. Schwarzenegger even thought that sentencing her to death was the right choice. She said, "It is perhaps better for the community that I should die, as it would be impossible for me to stop poisoning people." Schwarzenegger was beheaded on September 17, 1811. Number 4. Locusta. Locusta was born sometime in the 1st century AD in Gaul. As an adult, she moved to Rome, where she developed a reputation for being remarkably good at killing people with poison and making it look like they died naturally. Due to her unique skill set, Locusta was hired by rich and important people in Rome. While she was very good at killing people, she wasn't perfect, and she was arrested several times in connections with murders. However, since her clientele were the elite of the Roman Empire, it was in their best interest to get her out of jail as quickly as possible, so Locusta never stayed in prison long. In 54 AD, Locusta was summoned to a meeting with Empress Agrippina, the 4th wife and niece of Emperor Claudius. Agrippina wanted Claudius dead so that her son, Nero, could become emperor. Locusta prepared a batch of poisoned mushrooms, and Agrippina got Claudius to eat them. To ensure that Claudius would die, Locusta also gave Agrippina a feather with poison on it, and Agrippina shoved the feather down Claudius's throat. The poisons worked, and Claudius died on October 13, 54 AD, and Nero became emperor. Locusta was thrown into prison, and she was given a death sentence for murdering Claudius, but Nero saw further use for her. Claudius had a 14-year-old son named Britannicus, and Nero thought that he would challenge him for the throne. Nero had Locusta released from prison, and he had her develop a poison to kill Britannicus. Shortly afterwards, Britannicus died after he drank some poisoned wine. Nero pardoned Locusta for all her murders, and she became rich under his rule. Locusta worked out in the open, and she even opened a school to teach people how to use poisons. But it all came to an end when Nero's reign ended. Shortly before Nero's death, Locusta had given him a kid to poison himself, but he didn't use it. Instead, Nero chose to stab himself with his dagger on June 9, 68 AD. As for Locusta, she was executed in 69 AD. Apparently, she was sexually violated by a giraffe and torn apart by wild animals in front of a large crowd in the Colosseum. Number 3. Hélène G. Dago. Hélène Gédagot was born around 1803 in Brittany, France. As an adult, Gédagot held several menial jobs, including being a housekeeper and a seamstress. At almost every home she worked at from 1830 to 1841, someone died suddenly or became gravely ill. That is because Gédagot was poisoning them with arsenic. During those 11 years, she murdered at least 28 men, women, and children. One of those victims was her own sister. In another case, she killed 7 people living in one household. Then in 1841, Gédagot suddenly stopped killing. She apparently didn't pick up her old habit again until 1850. At the time, she was working as a housekeeper, and her employee's mother scolded her. This really got under Gédagot's skin. In retaliation, Gédagot poisoned the mother for 18 months, but the mother was one of Gédagot's luckier victims because she ultimately survived. After torturing the elderly woman for a year and a half, Gédagot moved on to another household where she murdered at least 3 people. She was caught when a doctor finally performed an autopsy on one of her victims, and he discovered traces of arsenic. When the authorities confronted her, Gédagot immediately denied using arsenic before she was even accused of poisoning anyone, so she was arrested on the spot. Gédagot was charged with 3 murders, but it's believed that she killed at least 10 times that amount. Gédagot was decapitated via the guillotine on February 26, 1852. Number 2. Catalina de los Rios y Gesberger. Catalina de los Rios y Gesberger was born in Chile sometime around 1604 to a rich family. She eventually got the nickname La Quintrella. The nickname was derived from the fact that she had flaming red hair, which was close in color to a quintrelle, which is a red flowered mistletoe. In 1622, when de los Rios was 18, she took her first life when she poisoned her own father's food. Next, she killed one of her lovers by ordering one of her slaves to kill him. After the murder, she had the slave sentenced to death. In 1626, de los Rios got married, and she seemed to settle down. Her demeanor changed when her husband died, when she was 50 years old. Her mean streak emerged with a vengeance. Almost daily, de los Rios beat and whipped her slaves and indigenous people who lived in the area. Afterwards, she ordered their bodies to be washed with cold water that sometimes contained salt, chilies, or urine. A few days after the beating, just as their bodies were starting to heal, she would whip them again. The human body can only take so much of this type of torture, and de los Rios ended up killing many people. According to reports at the time, she was accused of torturing 40 people to death. De los Rios avoided arrest and prosecution for years because of her money and her social stature. When the authorities did finally intervene, she was forced to leave her estate, but she never faced any real justice. She died of natural causes in January 1665, and she was interred at her church because she donated a lot of money to the church. Supposedly, the crucifix that she once owned still hangs in the church. Number 1. Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 in Transylvania to a noble family, and she had a rather unusual upbringing. When she was a young girl, her uncle introduced her to Satanism, and she was also trained in the world of sadomasochism by an aunt. When Bathory was 15, she married a count and moved into a castle in Hungary. By then, Bathory's taste for sadism was in full bloom. To satisfy those needs, her husband had a torture chamber built for her. He even joined her in torturing people and taught her things that he had learned on the battlefield. Bathory had several methods she liked to use to torture her victims. She liked to stick pins and needles under girls' fingernails. or she would cover her victims with honey and then unleash bees and ants on them. When her husband died in 1604, Bathory, or the Blood Countess as she was called, began to get more reckless and bloodthirsty. She would have some of her servants lure young girls to the castle with the promise of work. Once inside the castle, Bathory would torture the girls or have a servant torture them, and she'd watch. She would bite her victims so deeply that she was able to tear pieces of flesh off her still living victims. In the case of one young girl, she made her cook and eat a piece of her own flesh. One of the most famous aspects of the Bathory legend is that she killed virgins and bathed in their blood. Most scholars think that this is a myth, and there is no way to know if it is true or not. A part of the Bathory story that seems unbelievable, but it's true, is that because of her stature in society, she was able to get away with murdering peasant girls for a decade. Bathory's killing spree finally came to an end in either 1609 or 1610, when the King of Hungary finally chose to send a count to Bathory's castle to investigate the allegations against her. Not long after the Count's arrival, Bathory and her servants were arrested. No one is sure how many girls Bathory slaughtered for her own amusement. She was accused of killing between 80 and 650 girls. Bathory was never tried for her crimes. Instead, she was walled up in a room in the castle with only small slits for food and air. She survived in there, all alone, for 3 years before she was found dead at the age of 55 in August 1614. Number 3. Romain Jouanneau. In the summer of 1971, the Jouanneau family, who lived in Pontivy, France, were on vacation in Normandy, France. The family consisted of Jean, his 35-year-old wife, Romain, their daughter, 10-year-old Martine, their sons, 8-year-old Philippe and 1-year-old Laurent. For their vacation, they rented a farmhouse. On August 27, 1971, a neighboring farmer went over to the farmhouse where the family was staying. Their vehicle was there, but he did not see or hear the family. He made his way into the house, and he found a horrible scene. Jean and his 3 children, 10-year-old Martine, 8-year-old Philippe, and 1-year-old Laurent, were all dead. Their bodies were in blood-soaked beds. A bloody axe was found near one of the beds. It was quickly determined that the family had been hacked to death with the axe. The authorities were alerted and they came to the farm. They searched for Romain, who was missing from the house. About 100 yards from the farmhouse, there was a well. A searcher looked down into the well and he saw a human body. It was determined that was the body of 35-year-old Romain Jouanneau. The police believe that Romain got the axe and hacked her family to death one by one as they slept. When she was done murdering her family, she went and jumped to her death in the well. If there was a motive behind the massacre, it has never been made public. Number 2. Angelica Vasquez. In the spring of 2013, the Vasquez family lived on Paintbrush Street in Mesquite, Texas. Their home was in a quiet neighborhood. By all accounts, they seemed like a typical family. 44-year-old Marcelo and 43-year-old Angelica had been married for 23 years. They moved from Mexico to the United States in the 1990s. They had 2 children, 21-year-old Paulina and 18-year-old Alejandro. Alejandro lived at home and he was attending a community college. He also worked part-time at Blockbuster Video. Paulina was studying criminal justice at the University of Northern Texas in Denton, Texas. She lived in an apartment off campus. Marcello worked as a long-haul trucker. Angelica had worked at a cafeteria in a school until May 2012. Unfortunately, Angelica had been diagnosed with breast cancer. She had a double vasectomy, and in early 2013, she finished chemotherapy. On March 8, 2013, Paulina was home because of spring break. That night, Pauline, her father Marcello, and her brother Alejandro drank some alcohol. Angelica did not drink with them. The next morning at 6:30 a.m., a woman called the police because she thought she heard gunshots coming from the family's home. A police officer drove to the home and found no signs of a break-in or forced entry. He knocked on the door but got no answer. The officer couldn't legally enter the home, so he left. He returned twice that day, and still no one came to the door. 4 days later, the officer decided to stop by the house. He noticed that the newspaper and the mail had not been picked up in several days. The officer entered the home and found the dead bodies of the family members. All their bodies were found in different rooms. They had all been shot with a 9mm handgun, most likely while they were sleeping. In the master bedroom was the body of 43-year-old Angelica Vasquez. The gun was found on the floor beside her bed. It was clear that Angelica had shot her 44-year-old husband, her 21-year-old daughter, and her 18-year-old son. What wasn't clear was why she did it. Angelica did not leave a suicide note. Everyone who knew the family was shocked by the triple murder-suicide. Friends and family said that they seemed like a happy family. The police had never been called to their home. Angelica did not have a history of mental illness. One theory is that Angelica had post-traumatic stress disorder from battling cancer. However, this is only speculation. The only person who knew why Angelica killed her family is Angelica, and it appears that she took the secret of her motivation to her grave. So the Vasquez's friends and family will probably never know what was going on in Angelica's mind on that quiet Saturday morning. Number 1. Bonita Jax. Bonita Jax was born 2 days after Christmas in 1974. She grew up in Charles County, Maryland. She dropped out of school in the 10th grade when she was 17 years old. She had dropped out because she was pregnant. In January 1991, Bonita gave birth to a daughter, Brittany Jax. 5 years later, Bonita gave birth to another daughter, Tatiana Jax. In 2000, 25-year-old Bonita Jax started dating 31-year-old Nathaniel Fogel. Together, they had 2 daughters, Nikaya, who was born in 2000, and Ajah, who was born the next year. For several years, the family had a problem finding a place to live. In August 2006, a nonprofit group placed them in a row house in Washington, D.C. The year before that, Bonita and her mother fell out of contact. But Bonita's mother didn't have any concerns about her daughter or her granddaughters. Friends and neighbors of the family said that Bonita was a good and doting mother. Her 4 daughters were always bathed, their hair was always done, and they wore clean clothes. Problems first arose in 2004 when Bonita's eldest daughter, Brittany, was 13. She started to become interested in boys, and several boys were interested in her. Benita would call Brittany a whore and a bitch in front of the other children. She also started calling Brittany Jezebel. Benita also locked Brittany up in her bedroom. In 2006, Benita's boyfriend, Nathaniel Fogel, was sick with cancer. In November 2006, he lost his battle with cancer. After this, people noticed a huge change in Benita. She stopped taking care of her children. They were often seen wearing dirty clothes, and their hair was a mess. In early spring 2007, the girl stopped going to school. In March and April 2007, a social worker visited the home several times, but Benita would never allow her to enter. Even when the social worker came with a police officer, Benita would not allow them into the home. The social worker made several requests that a child welfare investigator check on the 4 girls, but no one ever did. In May 2007, Benita moved all the furniture out into the backyard. Months went by, and 2007 became 2008. On January 8, 2008, 2 U.S. Marshals came to the house to serve an eviction notice. Benita had not been paying the rent for some time. Initially, Benita wouldn't let them in, but the Marshals forced their way in, and they immediately smelled something awful. They went upstairs to one of the bedrooms. They found the mummified bodies of 3 girls next to each other on the floor. Bugs were crawling all over the bodies. The bodies were lined up in size, and they had white t-shirts on. The second bedroom was sealed with duct tape. The Marshals got the door open. Inside the room was the mummified body of an older girl. She was nude, and a white t-shirt had been draped over her body. She was lying in a pool of dried blood. A steak knife was found on the ground near her body. Benita was arrested and brought to the police station. She was questioned, and she gave long, rambling answers. She said that her daughters had been possessed by demons. The most powerful demon, Jezebel, had taken over Brittany's body. Benita said she thought that when the demons died, the girls would be brought back to life. She claimed that she didn't murder the children. Instead, they died in their sleep. She said that 5-year-old Ajah, the youngest, died first. Benita said that Nakaya and Tatiana thought it was funny that she had died. She said that they slept with her body that night. The next morning, she discovered that 6-year-old Nakai had died in her sleep. Then 11-year-old Tatiana died a short time later. While all this was going on, 17-year-old Brittany was locked up in her bedroom. Benita said that one morning she went into Brittany's room and found her dead on the floor. Benita explained that the furniture was moved outside because it had been infected by the demons. Because of the state of the bodies, the autopsies were difficult on 2 fronts. The first was determining the causes of death. One theory was that Benita starved them to death. It was later determined that Brittany had most likely been stabbed to death, but she may not have been stabbed with the knife found in her room. That knife had absolutely no trace of blood on it. Not even microscopic traces of blood were found. It was thought that Ajah was beaten and strangled to death. The other 2 girls had most likely been strangled to death. It was also clear that the girls had been tortured. The other difficulty with the autopsies was determining when the girls died. At first, the medical examiner thought that they had been dead for a month or two. But then more experts weighed in, and they thought that they had been dead anywhere from 3 to 8 months. What is known is that 17-year-old Brittany was the first to die. She was last seen alive about 10 months earlier in March 2007. The last time anyone saw any of the girls was in June 2007. A woman had dropped off Bonita's social security checks, and she saw the two youngest girls, Nikaya and Aja. Bonita was subsequently charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of first-degree child cruelty. Bonita Jax went to trial in July 2009. She pleaded not guilty. Bonita had refused to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Bonita was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of first-degree child cruelty. She was acquitted of Brittany's murder. The judge said that there was not enough evidence to prove that Brittany had been stabbed to death. In December 2009, Bonita was sentenced to 120 years of prison without the chance of parole. After the bodies were discovered, it led to a major investigation of the Child and Family Services Agency. 6 employees ended up being fired. The District of Columbia agreed to pay $2.6 million to the heirs of the dead girls. Bonita is currently incarcerated in a prison mental health unit in Fort Worth, Texas. At the time of this video, she is 45 years old.